Hey guys, it's Steve here, and before we get into the video, I just wanted to say some quick words. The first is that, like I mentioned in my content revamp, we're going to be starting a series of reviews on this channel. Obviously, that's the whole point of this channel in the first place, but I wanted this to be a clear-cut series. Now, one of the things that many of you guys may not have known, especially if you didn't see the post that I made on my gaming channel, is the fact that I wanted to make Shadow Reviews and White Shadow collaborate in sort of way in which the game that is currently on the series on White Shadow will be the game that I eventually review on this channel. And the way that I experimented with that is with this game, Sonic and SEGA All-Stars Racing. And it's a game that I actually really wanted to record footage for, and I thought, well, it's easy to write a review about this game since there's not that much going on in it anyway. So it can work in both ways. Of course, this is all experimental. Like I said, I'm not sure if I'll actually keep this format. This is just for a starting point to try to get somewhere, and I can actually start a format of how I want my review videos to actually be once we move on to some more bigger and grandiose games. So in the meantime, please enjoy this review. Sonic and SEGA All-Stars Racing is a game that I hold very fondly in my heart. It was a childhood classic for me and brings me lots of good nostalgia. Released in 2010, this racing game is one that features Sonic and Sega characters all fighting, or racing in this case, for the win. As the name implies, this is another SEGA All-Stars title, this time being a kart racer. Up until this point, there was no major SEGA racing game, and with all the All-Stars series games already existing, Sumo Digital decided that the best course of action was placing them in cars. Of course, this means that there will be instant comparisons to Mario Kart, but for the sake of this review, we will simply review the game as it is. And, for those of you who obviously are seeing this when this video is posted, this game is now 13 years old. And let's just say that a lot can happen in 13 years. I mean, like I said, this is a childhood game for me, released in 2010. This was back then Mini-Me was playing video games for the very first time. A lot has changed in gaming. Does this game hold up after all this time? Well, sit back, because that's exactly what I'm going to explain. "2010 was an interesting time, not just for Sonic as a franchise, but also for Sega. And it's always in these troublesome times in which one just wants to relax. And that to me is what Sonic and SEGA All-Stars Racing is. This is a game that was, in my opinion, very much a culmination of not just all of these franchises combined together in a game, but just a celebration of Sega as a whole. This is a topic that I'll bring up more in this game's sequel, Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transform, but just know that to me, my perception of these games will always be celebration of Sega and all their IPs. But going back into this game, Sonic and SEGA All-Stars Racing features a lot of different types of things from your normal kart racer. From your normal single races, Grand Prix, time trials, and missions, there's a substantial amount of content inside of this game that is plentiful and satisfactory. One thing I will say before moving on to my actual review of the gameplay is something you might be noticing in terms of the quality of the video. For the record, I'm playing this game via Steam, and the thing about this game is because it was being so old, it was simply ported onto Steam without being enhanced, which means that certain functionalities of the game no longer exist and have been erased by this port. For example, not being able to synchronize any of your save data onto the cloud, and not having the ability to purchase DLC or any online features. I'm not going to discredit the game for not having them, as the original version does. I'm just saying this because it makes the Steam version somewhat inferior. Another thing about this game is due to the fact that this game was simply ported, there's a lot of differentiation between the possible graphics that you can get. The game does offer you the opportunity to change the game's graphics settings, but not within the game. This must be done outside of the game using the launcher. Here you can decide your graphics settings using your GPUs, your resolutions, and all of that fancy stuff. The problem is, most of the time, You won't actually notice this until after you've loaded in the game, and with the game's launcher being inside of the game's file, sometimes it might be difficult to do this once you've already set it up. Because of this, when I was recording the series of videos I made for my gaming channel, you may notice that the early videos look like they're stretched, and that's because they are. I actually had to manually stretch them to a 16:9 aspect ratio because the game was actually running 4:3 natively. After I fixed this, now everything looks very noticeably different, as now the game perfectly fits in a 16:9 ratio. Surprisingly, for its lack of optimization on the Steam port, the game actually does feature a lot of different resolutions. It's just very weird that you can't customize them from within. But enough of that little tidbit, little rant, let's get on to the actual race mechanics. A typical race in this game consists of you and your fellow racers competing against all the track's hazards and items in order to secure the win. Of course, this entails a lot of different things. Starting first with the racers are all split into individual categories depending on their stats. We have characters from all kinds of SEGA IPs, primarily most from Sonic the Hedgehog, but we also have other characters such as Amigo, II, Beat, Alex Kidd, Billy Hatcher, and the Bonanza Brothers. The thing about all these characters, like I said, was that they are divided into 3 different vehicle types: cars, bikes, and hovercrafts. The stats all differentiate depending on the vehicle type. For example, cars all have similar stats, though they can still vary, but have the most consistent type of style. Bikes have the best boost in handling, and hovercrafts are the best in terms of they're not affected by terrain. However, they do have the worst handling. This encourages the player to not just stick to one character and to adapt to all the tracks. Specifically when it comes to the diversity of how these tracks' layouts are, you will soon recognize that certain characters are better than others. However, if you're looking for a more consistent style of gameplay and feel like you could only ever stick to one, bikes are the safest bet. Although they are light and can get rammed by bigger cars going faster than them, bikes still have the best boost in handling, which in terms of the overall gameplay loop, that is the greatest type. Speaking of locations, all the different locations featured in this game are also from a wide variety of locations. These are inspired from all already established locations within SEGA IPs. For example, we have Seaside Hill from Sonic Heroes. However, within this one location, there are 3 tracks that belong to that location. Seaside Hill is split into 3 different tracks, being Whale Lagoon, Lost Palace, and Ocean Ruin. These 3 tracks are all individual tracks, but I'm going to put them together in a series. And because of that, we have other locations such as Blizzard Castle, Casino Park, Carnival Town, Tokyo Toe, the Curian Mansion, Final Fortress, and many other locations from Super Monkey Ball. All these series are intertwined in the respective cups, which I'll get onto later. For now, it's time to talk about the other hazards, the items. Most of the items in this game are the usual types of items you'll see in a kart racer. Items that can be used to gain positions in terms of buffs, or items that you can throw at enemies and opponents in order to spin them out. You have your typical speed shoe, which is a boost, Mega Horn, which is able to spin out other opponents and be able to actually destroy objects coming towards you, the Energy Shield, which blocks any incoming damage, but we also have your weapon abilities or items that can be used to spin any people out. The normal one is the KO glove, which is a glove that you can shoot forward and backward in sets of 3 or 1, which hit opponents and spin them out, and can bounce off the track if they land on a corner of it. The more interesting one is the manual rocket, which actually homes in, depending on whether you're looking forward or backward at the nearest person. The confusing star is actually one of the more interesting ones in my opinion, as not only does it spin the opponent out, but it also causes the screen to be flipped upside down. You have a bowling bomb, which bowls like a bowling ball, and is able to travel a short distance before ultimately exploding, spinning out anybody in the blast radius. The giant rocket, the manual rocket's big brother, is able to travel for an indefinite distance until it is manually exploded, pushing people back and spinning them out if they happen to be in the bomb's path. You also have items that you can throw behind you, such as the mine, which can be used to trip many people behind you, as well as set a line of mines if you get a set of 3. Another one is the pocket rainbow, which if ran into won't spin you out, but will distract you with a colorful array of colors on your screen. The biggest and most impactful of these items is the All-Star, which is unique to every character, giving them a sense of immense speed while giving them a set path on the track, and being able to knock opponents back and spin them out in order to give yourself an advantage. Most of these are pretty similar, but some of them are very intricate. For example, the Bonanza Brothers, which teleports them to the front of the pack and are able to drop bombs on opponents in the lead so that you can catch up when you come out of the All-Star mode. Ultimately, these items are all your typical items, and they all offer something unique to the gameplay, which forces you to properly manage your items as you want to be able to reach the lead, and once you get that lead, maintain it. In terms of the track's difficulty, I wouldn't really say that any of these tracks are necessarily that difficult. Once you've gone through the cycle a little bit and you've gotten used to the mechanics and you've gotten used to the track layouts, the entirety of the tracks in this game aren't really that difficult. There are only two very memorable tracks, at least in my opinion, that did give me trouble at the beginning, and those are the last two tracks of the game, Monkey Target and Thunder Deck. Something to take note of is the fact that most of the tracks in a particular series revolve around a certain mechanic or a certain style. For example, all the tracks belonging to Casino Park and Seaside Hill are pretty straightforward and don't really feature that many obstacles unless you go through branching different paths. Tracks such as Final Fortress and the Super Monkey Ball tracks are infamously known for being more difficult, whether in length, obstacles, or in the case of the Super Monkey Ball tracks, hard turns and very long drifts. This is what makes Monkey Target for me one of the hardest tracks in the game. It starts out normal with a downsloping boost section and into a very straightforward and linear path, but once you start reaching the middle section, you constantly have to switch drift in order to stay on the track. This all culminates at the end where you escalate the tower into the pirate ship. This whole section is probably, in my opinion, the most difficult in the game, simply because you're quite used to having to drift around corners, but here the corner is too sharp that simply drifting will cause you to either fall off the stage or run into the wall and spin out. The best way to get around these turns is to actually turn for a brief moment and then drift. It's very difficult for the game to simply do this out of the wind, but I do appreciate it for at least being a challenge. The second one being Thunder Deck, simply because of the amount of hazards that are on the stage. Whether it be egg ponds, or the turrets throughout the track, or various other aspects, this track has, in my opinion, the most amount of obstacles that you have to worry about apart from other racers. Not to mention the fact that right at the beginning and right at the end, there are two very sharp turns that if you don't learn the proper curves for, or using the wrong character, it will be a hard time getting through this, which can lead to you losing positions and falling behind. It's interesting to note though, in terms of the overall characters and tracks, is that you don't actually have access to all of them at the start. At the start, you only have access to half the character roster and only the starting 4 tracks of the initial first cup. You can play them in the Grand Prix mode, but in single races you have to unlock them. This is where I introduce you to SEGA Miles. SEGA Miles is an in-game currency that you unlock by simply completing matches on certain game modes. Whether it be a single race, Grand Prix, missions, time trial, finishing and completing these will give you SEGA Miles, which you will then be able to unlock the remaining tracks and characters. Like I mentioned in the track section, the game features 6 different Grand Prix with 4 different tracks in them. We have the Chow Cup, Graffiti Cup, Egg Cup, Horror Cup, Samba Cup, and Monkey Cup. Grand Prix works pretty typically, just a series of 4 races with you gaining points after each race, with the racer with the most points winning the Grand Prix. The other modes featured in this game are Time Trial and Mission Mode. Mission Mode is probably the biggest one that you'll see heading into this game. It's sort of like a campaign style arcade mode where you go around completing different objectives in order to progress through. And there are quite a few missions in this game, enough to satisfy a lot of time in order to complete them. These challenges range from rival races, normal races, drift sections, collecting coins or other items, small Grand Prix, boost races, time gates, score gates, battle races, knockout races, avoiding certain obstacles, and probably the biggest one, the hit contest, which has you beat a sort of boss battle while being on a vehicle. Most of these are actually pretty simple to unlock, and you don't even require the full score AAA in order to actually advance, you just need 1A. Anything lower than an A will force you to restart the mission, but as long as you get an A, you will be fine. Again, most of these are fairly simple. I don't think that most people will be deterred from trying this because of difficulty. It's just that sometimes with the whole way that certain characters maneuver and the fact that you are locked to only one character per the challenge, some might be difficult than others depending or not if you've experienced playing with them. One of the biggest ones in my opinion is of course those boss battles. There are only 2 of them, one with Jackie and Akira and the final mission in the game with Sonic. The game does a pretty good job of teaching you what to do and how to properly manage your time and item usage, which ultimately in the boss battle you have to essentially be pretty good at. It took a couple of tries, but ultimately with enough practice you should be able to beat them, and for the most part, all the missions give you enough SEGA miles to actually progress through the game pretty fairly. The final one of these modes is of course the time trials. Here you'll pick your character and you'll go around the track establishing your best times in order to compare it with other people. Now of course, since we don't have online on the Steam port, you can't really compare them to other players around the world, but at the very least you can see how fast you're actually going. In terms of trying to do this to beat certain staff ghosts, most are fairly easy to beat simply by just racing normally. You don't really have to figure out a certain route. But at the very minimum do it because there is a challenge dedicated to doing all of this. One of the bigger aspects of this game is the ability to earn a plenitude of achievements. These can range from simple ones like racking up a certain lifetime amount of SEGA miles to more obscure ones like hitting certain people with a certain character's All-Star. These are obviously fairly simple and you can simply unlock them by playing the game, and some are more obscure that you may need to pay attention in order to accomplish. One of the more harder ones is of course earning all AAA scores on all the mission modes, which I personally haven't gone and done, but it is an extra series of challenges that one can access for that itch of challenge. One of the more obscure parts of this game, however, is the soundtrack. Apart from the menu and credits music, the soundtrack of this game is actually reused music from the games themselves. Like I mentioned earlier, each location in this game has a series of 3 tracks. Each series of tracks then has 5 different songs that you can choose to play on any of the tracks of that series. These songs are obviously still delegated to that specific series' franchise, and there's a lot of variety within them. This means that not every race is the same, as you can choose the tone of them. When I was recording my series for this game, I still went ahead and gave each certain track a certain song, but know that that's not universal. You can choose whatever you want, and it can even all be the same song for a series. You can select up to 5, but initially you only have 1, as you have to unlock the rest of the music with SEGA modes. But speaking of the actual music that was composed for this game, it was all composed by Richard Jacques, giving it a style of this early 2000s type racing style that really makes it feel like it has that unique style. The credit song, So Much More by Bentley Jones, is also an absolute banger. If you don't know, Bentley Jones also made the song Dreams of an Absolution, Silverstein. Apart from everything that I just mentioned, there's also some very interesting options that you can change. For example, you have your typical difficulty options, as well as having the ability to turn off items for any given race. Another thing that you can do is customize the amount of laps, reducing them from 1 all the way up to 9. But probably one of the most important options is the toggle of rubber banding. Rubber banding, if you don't know, is a mechanic in games where if you happen to be in the lead, certain opponents will start catching up to you in order to give you a challenge. To some people this is very unfair, and thankfully in this game, you have the option to turn it off. Now, me personally, I have this on because it doesn't really make a difference. Usually races are pretty fair, and if you know the game pretty well, you should be winning races. However, I do see the point of using this especially if you challenge yourself to get better by having 9 laps, or if there's a lot of commotion going on when you first start in the game with little items going around. So having that option is pretty good, even if I personally don't use it. This game was fortunate enough to receive DLC. A very small one, but it was in the form of a new racer in Metal Sonic and a new track and the Egg Hanger. Both of these are pretty good. As I'm on Steam and you don't have access to this DLC on that version, I can only show you related gameplay, but ultimately both of these items would return in the next game, with the Egg Hanger being a signature track on there. One thing that I need to mention is the fact that the Xbox 360 port received an exclusive character, that being Banjo-Kazooie, as well as having the ability to play as your avatar, which is also a thing on the Wii port, which this game had. It's completely different to the rest of the game, and I won't really talk about it since I not only never played it, it's also a drastically different game, with certain things being changed to where I feel like it's a completely separate title. Overall, I think that the entirety of the game is actually quite good. I mentioned that this was a very early childhood game of mine, and although that may temporarily obscure my vision and certain biases when it comes to the game, I can say 13 years later that it is still a good game. It's a cool game to come back to every once in a while, especially when you get back into the gameplay loop with all the wacky mechanics and all the different characters going around it. It has its own charm, if you know what I'm saying. Many people might feel deterred with the fact that once you complete everything there's not really that much to do, but overall it is the kart racer, so it's one of those games that you're not supposed to consistently play and come back to every once in a while. It still holds up, and it's still amazing. And like I said in the beginning, to me it feels like a celebration of all of SEGA, its characters and all of its games, and that will forever be what it holds dearly to me. But what do you guys think? Did you guys also grow up with this game? Let me know all your thoughts and opinions down below. But in the meantime, this is Shadow Reviews. I'll catch y'all later.